Do you ever feel like the fat just isn't coming off fast enough? You literally put in all this work on a weekly basis to get yourself into a deficit. You're measuring your food on a scale, you know you're in a calorie deficit, and yet you step on the scale and you're maybe down a pound, if that, on a good week. And oftentimes you may actually go up a pound and you're like, what the heck? I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. Well, this was exactly what motivated me to find the fastest possible way to lose fat. And I want to do this because I've been trying to lose weight for 22 years. And now that I'm finally starting to get results, I just want it to go faster. I am so tired of being fat. I am so tired of being overweight. And I just want it gone. And I think most people can relate to that who have dealt with this kind of thing themselves, where they're like, I just want this weight off. I want it gone. I want it gone now. So I think this would be a helpful thing to figure out so that other people can benefit from it as well. But there's a particular problem that I ran into, which is fast weight loss does not equal fast fat loss. There's actually a reason doctors say you can only lose 2 pounds of fat on a weekly basis safely. And the reason for this is because your body at a certain point will stop increasing the amount of fat it burns and switch over to increasing the amount of muscle it burns. So then the question becomes, is this necessary? Does this have to be the case? Do you have to always lose muscle mass when trying to lose fat, or can you potentially mitigate this issue? Well, the first question I asked was, well, why do we burn muscle at all? Why is that a thing? Why is it our bodies decide to burn muscle in the first place? And that's what led me to the concept of your muscle mass actually burns 3 to 4 times more calories per pound than your fat does. So when it comes to your body's survival mechanism, if it feels like something is going desperately wrong in your system, it's going to get rid of the expensive tissue. And the expensive tissue is your muscle mass because it burns way more energy than anything else. So you can kind of liken this to cutting back on the hours at work versus losing your job entirely. When you cut back on the hours at work, you may have to tighten the purse strings a little bit. You may have to rebudget a little bit, but generally you can get through. You can still pay your bills. When you lose your job entirely, now you start going into disaster mode where you're like, okay, I don't know how I'm going to pay rent. I don't know how I'm going to get food on the table. I may not be able to make my car payments this month. What am I going to do? And you start looking for drastic solutions where you're like, what can I sell to get money in fast now when I need it? And that's the same thing your body's doing. It essentially is saying, well, while I enjoy having this muscle mass around, it's too expensive and I am dying. So I need to get rid of this stuff. And yes, I'm going to be using the fat stores because we have it, but this muscle mass is really expensive. And if we're dying, this is the stuff that's going to kill us. So we're going to get rid of it just to keep us safe. Now the question becomes, does that have to be the case? Like, can you get enough nutrients to where you are making sure your muscle mass isn't something that your body needs to get rid of while still being in an extreme calorie deficit? And that begs the question, well, what nutrients do you need? Do you absolutely need in order to maintain your muscle mass, to tell your body we're not dying, so that it continues to just focus on burning fat? And that's when I started researching protein. Now, protein is definitely an important nutrient. It's probably the most important macro that nobody talks about in weight loss. I don't know why. It is a very powerful thing. Like, it revs up your metabolism, it helps repair your body, and it helps regulate your hormones, which are probably actually one of the biggest factors in why you're fat in the first place. So protein is very, very important and very, very helpful. So the question becomes, well, if you get enough protein, could you potentially be in that extreme calorie deficit and lose weight? And that's when I stumbled upon protein-sparing fasting. They've actually done research on this topic, and I've done some research on fasting in the past and discovered that the muscle loss is a big thing there. So when I stumbled upon protein-sparing fasting, I was like, fascinating. I've had this theory that you could eat enough protein and not lose muscle mass while still being in an extreme calorie deficit. And now I have the proof that you can actually do this. And what they found in this study is that with people eating only 700 to 1,000 calories per day, having like a 2,000 calorie deficit on a daily basis, they actually were able to maintain and or build muscle mass, which kind of goes against a lot of the information we have around muscle in the first place, which is the theory that if you are in a calorie deficit, you can't gain muscle at all. But turns out that's not true. If you have enough protein, you can maintain your muscle and add more. And that's just fascinating. So I was like, hey, my theory's proven correct. Now I can test this thing out. But I ran into another problem. I don't like the taste of meat. And when you think of getting more protein into your diet, what do you initially come up with? For me, that's meat. And I think for most people, it's going to be meat. And when you don't like the taste of meat and you discover, hey, I need to get 160 grams of protein on a daily basis, and I usually eat 20, you're kind of like, oh my gosh, that is so much more meat that I need to eat on a daily basis. So I started looking for alternatives where I'm like, I need to find some other way of getting protein into my diet that doesn't require me to eat like 1.5 pounds of chicken on a daily basis. Now, why chicken? Because chicken is a very lean meat, high protein. But if you don't like meat, not really an option. So I found 3 alternatives. The first one is dairy. And most people, they go with Greek yogurt. God knows why, because personally, I think the taste of Greek yogurt is just awful. It is so sour, horrible tasting. I don't know how people can stand it. The second dairy option would be cottage cheese. And while my taste buds have shifted to the degree where I do actually like cottage cheese now, I didn't like the fact that it pretty much inevitably comes with a higher fat content than other protein sources. So I was like, I guess I can include cottage cheese. I don't know. And I did to some extent. But I was still looking for other alternatives. And then I looked at beans or plant proteins. And the problem with those is that while they are high fiber and will keep you full, they tend to have more carbohydrates. So you tend to have a higher calorie count on a daily basis just getting your protein in. So I was like, well, that can work for vegans. I don't know that they can lose weight as quickly because now you have to get your protein from these high carb sources. So then I was left with the third option, which is protein shakes. Now, I know that there are some people who are like, protein shakes aren't great for you. And I don't really know why, because from what I understand, protein is protein is protein. And whey protein in particular, which is the type of protein shake I was looking into, is actually really good for protein absorption in your body. So as I was looking into whey protein shakes, I was like, this is really good stuff. Like, I don't know why people complain about it. I don't know why people say this is bad. And I guess one of the main reasons would be because now you're not actually eating things, you're drinking your food, which is a little bit of a psychological, unappealing concept. But I do think the protein shakes are hyper palatable. They travel really freaking well. And generally speaking, they have very little in the way of extraneous calorie sources. So I was like, you know what? I think protein shakes are the basis that I'm going to be using for this entire fast because it's just such a good source of protein. So that's what I did. I decided I was going to get most of my protein from protein shakes and essentially have a protein shake fast where I ate essentially nothing but protein shakes for the entire length of this. But of course, whenever you decide to go on a diet, that's exactly when the world starts to hit you with any number of issues. And that's what came up on this fast, because I didn't take into account the fact that my husband and I would need to go on a business trip in the midst of my fast. And my husband is somebody who tends to eat hyper palatable food that is extremely appealing. So knowing that I now had to spend 2-3 days with my husband eating all this stuff in front of me while I was trying not to eat, essentially, was not an appealing concept. So I did my best to prepare for this. I made sure that I had my protein all packed up, ready to go in individual serving sizes, so I could just throw it in my travel blender and, have my food available. And that's something that's pretty cool about protein, is it does actually keep you feeling pretty full. But when you're around somebody who has really interesting food and you're like, oh, I really want to eat that, still not that helpful. So I had to really deal with my own desire for other things a lot on this trip. And that was not easy in particular. Thankfully, the business did keep us fairly busy, so I didn't have a whole lot of time to think about it once we got there. But the trip down also passed by my favorite burger joint. And that was kind of depressing, actually, to miss out on, because I love that place. It has some nostalgic value to me as well, because it was one of the places I frequented a lot as a semi-truck driver. So I really didn't want to skip it, but I did. And we kept driving, and we made it down to Reno and started our business trip. So I felt pretty proud of myself for being able to skip this really tempting thing on the way down. But of course, on the way back, it was a very different story, because here we are, we've been in the car for 8 hours, pretty much driving nonstop. It's getting late. I've been fasting for an entire week, essentially, and this is the last freaking hour or so of my fast, and I'm going, do I really want to skip this? We don't come down here very often. We don't get to come to this place and get burgers. It's very, very rare that we're here. Do I really want to miss out on this opportunity to be able to enjoy something that is fairly rare, this special occasion of sorts? Do I really want to miss out on that? And I decided eventually, after hours, literal hours of debate in my head, that I would just have the burger. Because I think oftentimes we're way, way too hard on ourselves. We have this expectation of perfection when it comes to weight loss, and that's just not realistic. If you have to be perfect all the time, of course you're going to quit. There's no way you're going to be able to stick with something and be perfect 24/7 for years. Generally speaking, even if you're losing, say, 4 pounds of fat on a weekly basis, it's still going to take you months to get to your goal weight, especially if you're like hundreds and hundreds of pounds overweight. So this idea of just like never ever giving into temptation and never ever messing up or never ever taking a break and giving in or having some kind of treat, I think is just insane. So in many ways, I was like, you know what? I don't think this is actually a problem. I don't think this is actually going to make any sort of impact really on my journey. And if I can reward myself for a job well done with this, it gives me motivation to actually keep going with future endeavors to lose weight as well. So I was like, we got to figure out how to make dieting fit into our lives. I have to figure out how to make my diet fit into my life. I have to be able to participate in family events. I have to be able to, have birthday parties for my girls and not feel like I'm constantly missing out. And this would be a perfect opportunity to learn moderation to some extent. So we stopped off. I got a burger. It was delicious. I enjoyed it. I was very happy with that decision. And then we went back home and finished out the day. And that brings us to the results. And you already know from the title that I lost a substantial number of inches off of my body. But what's interesting is I actually lost 0 weight on the scale. And yes, this is a deeply frustrating thing, but it's actually something that I see over and over and over and over again in my weight loss journey. I have lost so much fat off my body. Like I can literally see it in the mirror. Ironically, I cannot see it in my photos, and I do not see it on the scale because the scale is exactly the same weight it was when I started. But I literally have people commenting to me that I'm thinner. I can feel my clothes are smaller on my body. There are more air gaps where there didn't used to be. My bras are all on the tightest rung now. That didn't used to be the case either. So I have some definitive proof that I'm actually smaller than I used to be, and I haven't lost any weight whatsoever, and it's been months. So this is something that I think is oftentimes not communicated to people, where we have these expectations where you're like, hey, I'm going to be able to see the difference. I'm going to be able to see the difference on the scale as well. The scale is going to reflect my work. And in my experience, that is never the case. Almost never the case. Especially for me, it is not the case at all, ever. Yes, sometimes I get some fluctuations. At one point, I did get down to like 226 or something like that, but then I jumped right back up to 250. So God knows what happened. Maybe the scale was just off that day. I don't know. But here I am, still 250 pounds and substantially smaller than I used to be. And the question is, will I continue to be 250 pounds throughout my entire weight loss journey? Am I going to wind up being a skinny person who weighs 250 pounds, which would just be fascinating? Like, I don't even know if that's possible, but we'll see, I guess, as I continue to go down this journey. But overall, I actually feel like this is a really good result, because here I am, pretty much the exception to every fat loss rule, and yet I am losing fat. And you can see it in my body scans, which makes a huge difference. And I think that's something that I would recommend to other people, is if you are trying to lose weight, don't actually go with photos. Don't focus on the scale. Go with the body scans. Go with the Me 360 app, because I think it actually is going to give you a much more realistic picture of what's happening in your body. But all things considered, if you know you're doing the right things, if you know you're in a calorie deficit, don't listen to what everybody else is telling you about what your progress should look like. Because the reality is, you will likely be getting results. You just won't be able to recognize them until you get to the end. I remember watching a documentary about a woman who was losing weight, and I watched her progress the whole time. She had pictures every week or something through this whole journey. And I remember thinking she doesn't look any different until all of a sudden, right up at the end, I saw the difference. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of weight. That's a big difference. When she compared the initial of, like a year before to this extra skinny person now, I was like, holy crap. But the whole time, I didn't see any change whatsoever. She would literally have all these pictures of her progress next to each other. I didn't see the change. I don't see it in me. I didn't see it in her. And I think there are a lot of people who have this same issue. So don't trust your photos. Don't trust the scale. Trust your clothing. Trust your scans to an extent. Like, we don't know how accurate those are either. But generally speaking, just trust that you're doing the right stuff and keep going. Now, if you want to know a more reliable, sustainable way to lose weight, make sure to watch this next video though, because this for sure is a harder path to follow. And this video is going to tell you all the right steps you can take that doesn't require you to take this extreme approach that I just did. But overall, very glad of the progress, very happy to know that this is a possibility. My muscle mass did not decrease as far as I can tell. My body scan said that it didn't either. So overall, I'd say this is a win, and anything you do to improve your health is also a win. So good luck, and I hope you have a wonderful weight loss journey.